There are different items on the agenda of the 34th session of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians, notably the issue of gender-sensitive awareness. Dear colleagues, your debates will be an opportunity for us and for you to make exchanges and to learn from your respective experiences. And this will bring to our debate a huge amount of richness and diversity. We must also paint a faithful picture of our respective countries and parliaments and look at the role that we must play as representatives of peoples to make sure that our parliaments and societies be spaces that enshrine the rights of men and women. Your Excellency, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, parliamentarians, I thereby invite you all to make the most of your days here that we're going to work together. I'm sure they will be quite intensive days so that we can have tangible recommendations that will contribute to gender equality. We will have lots of occasions to discuss, so I don't want to take up too much of your time because the agenda is really quite full, but I would like to wish you a very fruitful and productive session of work. I would like to conclude by saying on behalf of the Parliament of Rwanda that we thank you very much and we really hope that you enjoy your stay in our country. Despite the fact that you have quite a heavy agenda, I hope that you are able to explore our country, our city rather, in your free time so that you can make the most of the culture and spirit of Rwanda. Thank you for listening.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
President, for your welcoming words. I will then invite the President of the IPU to take the floor and to make his welcome address. Thank you.
Merci, Madame President.
Thank you very much to the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Rwanda.
34th session of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians, dear friend, Madam President of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, Mr. Secretary General. Usually I need to say now, Madam Speakers and Mr. Speakers, but I believe that here I will find just Madam Speakers of Parliament, because I tried to identify, but I didn't identify any man speaker present inside the room. Madam Deputy Speakers, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be opening the Forum of Women Parliamentarians on the occasion of the 145th IPU Assembly. It is a pleasure to be with you all here and welcome to Kigali. This Forum of Women Parliamentarians is a crucial platform of the IPU. Gender equality and women's empowerment are on the top of our agenda. They are also on the top of the agenda of our host parliament, which is the parliament of the world with the highest proportion of women members. Congratulations, Madam Speaker. It's something that you should be very proud. Let me give you that proportion, but I don't get to state that figure very often. We have here in Rwanda 61.3% of members of the Rwanda Chamber of Deputies as women. I repeat, 61.3%. Something amazing in our world. And allow me to say, elected. They went to elections and they got the majority. It was not a simple nomination. on their districts, they needed to be, they fight with men, and they won the election. Congratulations. This forum that gathers us today is our guide to focus on the perspectives of women in all our work and to set the tone from a gender perspective in our deliberation as the Assembly. This is even more important today as we live in such troubled times of pandemic, armed conflicts, climate-related disasters. The current situation in Ukraine shows to all of us this impact every day. However, we also see examples of Ukrainian women's brave resistance and resilience. And we saw that every day again. I would like to acknowledge the President of Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, Mrs. Lesia Vasilienko, who I am very happy to have with us here today. Lesia, you are one hero to all of us. Colleagues, we know that crises such as armed conflict cause high levels of displacement and migration that expose women and girls to gender-based violence and other forms of exploitation while they are on the move. As parliamentarians, it is our duty to ensure that we uphold a right-based approach to migration that prevents human rights abuses from all parties. And I am very pleased that you will be discussing this issue today to give directions from a gender perspective to the resolution under examination during our Assembly. As we tackle gender-based violence in our societies, we must also do so in parliaments. Sometimes we don't believe that, but happen also discrimination inside our own parliaments. We must ensure that the parliaments are free from sexism, harassment, and violence against women MPs. We know that women MPs compose 26.5% of our parliaments globally. However, we also know that more than 85% of women MPs we surveyed in Europe face psychological violence. In Africa, 40% of women MP surveyed were sexually harassed. Globally, 25% of women MP face physical violence. We found out, even when evidence that violence against women MPs is perpetrated by male colleagues inside our own parliaments. Such violence targeting women leaders is part of a structural tactic of men to dominate and silence women and get them out of decision-making and leadership. But we won't let this tactic work. And we know what needs to be done. Having a gender-sensitive parliament is a key strategy for women's full participation and for equality between men and women. We are celebrating 10 years since the IPU Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments was adopted in one assembly much like this one. As you debate on how gender-sensitive parliaments can be free from gender-based violence, you are doing this not just for your fellow members of parliament, but believe, also for generations of women and girls leaders to come. Colleagues and friends, today is the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Girl. Now more than ever, we need to use our leadership to take impactful action to fulfill the rights of women and girls. The world's 600 million adolescent girls face unique challenge, and they deserve that their diverse voices be heard. We must make our institutions meaningful and safe for women today, so that future generations of girls have access to political participation and continue hunting to be in politics. We need to push harder to make a difference as MPs. We have power in our hands. Let us move political commitment to the next level by prioritizing gender equality in our work, setting 50-50 as the target of equal participation in our parliaments. And let's make zero tolerance to violence against women our standard. That's why I wish you an excellent session of the forum and fruitful assembly. And I know you will work harder to achieve it. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Much, Mr. President. When we have male presidents here in the room, we have to remember that male parliamentarians are not excluded from the work of the forum. I would ask for an applause for the men who are here with us. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your message and for your support, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, Madam President of the Chamber of Deputies of Rwanda, Mr. President of the IPU, and our Secretary General, we have a very full agenda, and please, we excuse you at any moment if you have pressing matters to attend. Dear colleagues, thank you. Dear colleagues, we will now start our work with the adoption of the agenda that you have received and which has been discussed by the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians in March 2022. I would like to ask you for your adoption of the agenda. I do not see any objections. The agenda is adopted. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleagues. We have many interesting subjects ahead of us on our agenda, and I'm sure that we will have very animated and interesting discussions on these issues. Our session today will continue until 6:30. And now we will move on to point 3 of our agenda, which is about the recent activities to advance gender equality. I would like to invite Madame Lesia Vasilenko, President of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, to present the work that has been carried out by the Bureau in the previous sessions. Madame Vasilenko, you have the floor. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, it is a great blessing to be with you today. I am pleased to brief you on the work that the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians carried out last March in Nusa Dua and earlier this morning here in Kigali. This 145th Assembly is a historic moment as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments adopted by the IPU member parliaments. The Plan of Action is a unique forward-looking strategic document that aims at transforming parliaments into institutions that embody respect and promote gender equality. During this assembly, we will have several opportunities to take stock of progress achieved so far in having more gender-sensitive institutions and to look at the future of gender-sensitive parliaments. Allow me to highlight the main ones. First, The general debate of this assembly will serve to assess how far we have come in implementing the plan of action. It will also serve to deepen our commitment to making parliaments even more gender sensitive to deal with crisis and drive resilience. Second, later today, this forum will have a panel discussion on the linkages between gender-sensitive parliaments and the eradication of sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliaments. As you are aware, when such acts pervade, parliaments miss out their responsibility to be representative, efficient, and effective, and fail in their duty to serve the population in all its diversity. With this panel, we will focus on concrete solutions already implemented in some parliaments to create a culture of equality and of zero tolerance to any form of gender-based violence. In conjunction with this panel, I am pleased to invite you to visit the exhibition on Parliaments Free from Sexism, Harassment and Violence Against Women, which will showcase communication material from parliaments on this matter. Please take the time to look and learn from these good practices and get inspired to take further action in your own parliament. Third, this forum will be organizing a parity debate on Thursday, 13th October, dedicated to rejuvenating parliaments, why younger and gender-sensitive parliaments and efficient institutions. This debate will examine the needs, expectations, and aspirations of a more diverse generation of men and women MPs. It will also look at how the use of new technologies in Parliament can support or challenge gender equality. As always, for our parity debate, make sure to bring with you female and male colleagues from your delegations. Fourth, I would like to draw your attention to a side event that will focus on women's parliamentary caucuses and identify links between the work of such caucuses and the transformation of parliaments into more gender-sensitive institutions. Entitled Towards Gender Equality, Celebrating and Understanding the Accomplishments of Women's Parliamentary Caucuses. This side event will take place on Friday, October 14th from 11:30 to 1 p.m. Colleagues, I am also pleased to inform you that in Nusa Dua, the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians and the Committee on the Human Rights of Parliamentarians had a series of exchanges of views with the aim of better supporting women parliamentarians against acts of gender-based violence. These ongoing joint efforts will continue towards the development of a special protocol for women MPs victims of gender-based violence. Turning to the business of our session today, we will be debating the draft resolution of the Standing Committee on Democracy and Human Rights entitled Parliamentary Impetus to Local and Regional Development of Countries with High Levels of International Migration and to Stopping All Forms, including state-sponsored, of human trafficking and human rights abuses. Our debate will focus on gender aspect of the draft resolution and in particular on, number one, upholding a rights-based and gender-responsive approach to migration. Number two, addressing the root causes of trafficking of women and girls, especially for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And number three, ensuring survivor-centered anti-trafficking legislation and enforcement. This will allow us to consider amendments from a gender perspective to the draft resolution. We will have this debate in plenary. The Bureau agreed that Ms. Al-Nassif from Egypt will chair this debate and Ms. Bujela from Eswatini will be the rapporteur. I take it that you will agree with these proposals. Yes, good. Colleagues, for my last point, let me say how deeply I am aware that the war that my country, Ukraine, is undergoing has had a devastating impact on women's rights and the rights of girls worldwide. It has been widening the gender gap and creating alarming increase in food insecurity. It has also resulted in increases in gender-based violence, transactional sex for food and survival, sexual exploitations and trafficking of women and girls in many crises, conflicts and humanitarian settings around the world. It is a war that can end only when the aggression of the Russian Federation ends against Ukraine. and when all the Russian troops are pulled out from my country. And as soon as that is done, we can go back to peaceful development and to living and developing gender equality and gender-based violence to gender-based parliaments to the full. We will only be able to respond to all of these tragedies by renewing here in Kigali a global feminist solidarity in the name of peace and in support of all crisis-affected people. And I thank you for this.
Merci.
Many thanks for this report, Madame Vasilenko. I would like to invite all members, men and women, to go to the meeting that you have mentioned. And I would like to finish this point by thanking the President, the Vice President, and all members of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians for their key work, important work that they do for the equality of women and girls. I would like to have one more applause for the work of these people. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Now we will move on to the participation of men and women in this 145th IPU Assembly. We have the Gender Partnership Group, which has not yet met during this Assembly. So I would like to invite the Secretary of the IPU, dear Zaina Halal, to share with us information on the participation of men and women, this Gender Partnership Group, in the 145th Assembly. Thank you very much, Madam President.
As at 10 October, there are 35.3% of women participating in this 145th Assembly. Please consider this figure as an initial figure, a preliminary one, that may change from now until the end of the Assembly. This proportion of 35.3% is a bit lower than the one we had at the last Assembly in Nusa Dua, which stood at 38.9%. So let's hope that by the end of this Assembly, we would have reached 38.9% or more women attending this 145th Assembly of the IPU. Dear delegates, the proportion of women in the Assembly and the proportion of men participating is closely monitored by the Gender Partnership Group of the IPU. The Gender Partnership Group is made of 2 men and 2 women, members of the Executive Committee of the IPU, the highest decision-making body of our organization. This shows you how much this issue of equal participation, of gender sensitivity is high on the IPU agenda. However, at this Assembly, we have too many single-sex delegations that are participating, and this is happening despite a strong sanction system that exists in our organization. There are here in Kigali 101 delegations of 2 members and more. Among these 101 delegations, 18 are single-sex. 15 of them are male only, and 3 are all female. We have to remain vigilant, as having 18 single-sex delegation is having 18 too many delegations that are of the same sex. The Gender Partnership Group will meet on 14 October and will provide additional statistics on the participation of men and women in this Assembly. It will also do the rest of its jobs, which is to first monitor the situation of parliaments with no or few women members. it will hold a hearing for that, and also do its other job, which is to make sure that the IPU is the most gender-sensitive institution possible. Madam President, thank you for the opportunity.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for this summary and this interesting information. Thank you, dear Zaina. We are looking forward to finding out the final statistics from the Assembly, and we hope that it will include more women. Thank you. Dear colleagues, we will now move on to the recent IPU activities for the promotion of gender equality. We will focus on 3 main activities. The first will be on the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament, which took place on the 8th and 9th of September in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. The second activity will be about the Convention on all forms of discrimination against women, CEDAW, and including a seminar that was about CEDAW. The third activity, main activity, is about the follow-up activities from the launch of a study, the 2021 study on sexism, harassment and violence towards women in the parliaments in Africa, and there will be another conference on this subject. Dear colleagues, to talk about the first point, the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament, we are delighted to introduce Ms. Chinomoma, the women speaker from Zimbabwe, and Madame Maharani from the Chamber of Representatives of Indonesia. Madame Chinomona, you have the floor.
Madam, if I may recognize Madam President of the Forum, Madam President of the Bureau, dear colleagues and friends. Last September 8 and 9, the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament met in Uzbekistan and was attended by more than 100 participants. The women speakers focused on priority action areas for parliamentary leadership to better deliver on sustainability and prosperity when anticipating future risks and responding to crises. Women focused on deliberations on how to address the risks of the post-pandemic global recovery from the perspective of sustainable development rooted in justice, inclusion, and environmental protection. Reflecting on experiences from the pandemic, we looked at the global recovery from the perspective of sustainable development rooted in justice, inclusion, and environmental protection. As our economies recover from recent crises, we firmly agreed that there is an urgent need for a green economy that is more inclusive, including by recognizing the value of care and unpaid work. We also recognized the role of gender-sensitive parliaments in encouraging gender-responsive legislation and supporting the eradication of violence against women and girls, including online. We highlighted the importance of parliamentary leadership in responding to such risks. The Tashkent Declaration that we have adopted during the summit calls to step up implementation of the IPU Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments. Immediate and robust actions should be prioritized in all parliaments to have equal numbers of men and women, to mainstream gender across all work, to improve family-friendly infrastructures and culture, to implement policies to end sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliament, and to make gender equality a shared goal among men and women MPs. Dear colleagues, the women speakers who lead the way in building resilience by prioritizing the protection and advancement of women's rights and empowerment throughout our work. I count on you to join our efforts. I thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And now I would like to call on Madame Maharani to take the floor and to inform us on the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament. You have the floor.
Madame Maharani, à vous la parole.
Maharani, you have the floor.
Honorable Madam President of the Forum, Honorable Madam President of the Bureau, distinguished guests, it is an honor to join you at the 34th session of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians and present a report of the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliament. At the summit in Tashkent, we focus our deliberation on assessing benefits and risks of new technologies, of risk anticipation, and more economic resilience. Technology is an important means of equalizing the playing field between men and women. We agree that recent advancements in the digital economy are a key component of economic resilience and recovery. They present an opportunity for enhanced progress if and only if they are implemented in a gender-sensitive way. We need to seize this opportunity to foster greater gender equality, boost economic growth, and build a more inclusive world. We were concerned about the risk posed by the growing digital gap, online harassment, fake news, hate speech, and online violence, which hinder the right and freedom of women and girls everywhere. We call that this risk be addressed through policies and bridge the digital divide and protect the right of women and girls online. We also recognize the role of gender-sensitive parliament in encouraging gender-responsive legislation and supporting the eradication of violence against women and girls, including online. We highlighted the importance of parliamentary leadership is responding to such reach. The Tashkent Declaration, adopted at the end of the summit, reflect the commitment from women speakers to transforming our institution into gender-sensitive parliaments that enact gender-responsive legislation. The legislation would respond to the growing risk that protect the right and freedom of vulnerable groups of women and girls everywhere. I know we can count on all of you to drive this important agenda with us. I thank you.
Many thanks again, Madam Speaker from Indonesia, and for the success of the 14th Summit of Women Speakers of Parliaments. As we have the information about this summit, and we have guidelines that have been given from the President, and we would like to take them into account within this assembly. To receive information about CEDAW, I have the pleasure of calling on the Vice President of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, Ms. Hala Fayez. You have the floor.
Madam President, dear colleagues, I'm pleased to brief you on the very important and fruitful cooperation between the IPU and the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. As you all know, the CEDAW Committee has the essential mandate to monitor and guide states' implementation of the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the International Bill of Women's Rights. For 2 decades now, the CEDAW Committee and the IPU have been working hand to hand to promote stronger involvement of parliamentarians in ensuring implementation of the Convention nationally. And there is so much we all need to do so that CEDAW is translated into our laws and policies, but also, most importantly, into the daily lives of women and girls. It is in this context that last May, I chaired the first in a series of IPU webinars on parliamentary engagement in CEDAW implementation, reporting, and follow-up. This first webinar brought together participation of 15 parliaments, especially those from countries scheduled for review by the CEDAW Committee. We were briefed on the work of CEDAW Committee and its important guidance on pressing issues such as climate change and gender, and conflict and gender. CEDAW members also informed us they are about to renew the committee guidance on women's political participation, which is key for ensuring all other rights in the Convention. The CEDAW Committee counts on the IPU and our parliaments to champion the gender parity objective and contribute to their work in this area. During the webinar, we also heard inspiring examples from colleagues whose parliaments have integrated CEDAW in their work and how that has helped advance much-awaited legal reforms and policies. The existence of specialized bodies, such as gender committees, have served as great platforms to facilitate this. Colleagues, I encourage you all to participate in future IPU webinars and to fully take part in the CEDAW reporting processes. Our parliaments must also build the capabilities of all members, men and women alike, on the CEDAW Convention and the systematic follow-up on the concluding observations that are adopted by the CEDAW Committee following the review of our country's reports. You can always count on the IPU Secretariat to support your Parliament's engagement in all aspects of the CEDAW implementation, reporting, and follow-up. Just ask. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vice President of the Bureau, for this informative presentation. We are very grateful for the organization of these webinars and for implementing the work on the Convention. I would like to now invite the Secretary from the Program Manager of the IPU and Gender and Youth Programs, Ms. Zaina Hilal, who will, and I would like to congratulate you for your work on equality. Thank you very much, Madam President.
We'll remember that at the end of 2021, we have launched the publication, the study on sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliament in Africa. This regional study followed a previous one done at the European level, which itself followed yet a previous regional global study on worldwide on sexism, harassment, and violence against women. 1 year after the publication of the joint IPU and African Parliamentary Union study on Africa, a regional conference for African parliaments entitled Preventing and Responding to Violence Against Women in Politics and in Parliaments will take place on 13 November and 1 December 2022 in Lomé, Togo. The conference is jointly organized by the IPU, the African Parliamentary Union, APU, and the National Assembly of Togo. And all parliaments of Africa will receive the invitation to this conference, but please mark it on your agenda already. The conference in Lomé will be an opportunity for African parliaments to examine in depth how violence against women in politics and in parliaments manifests itself, and which are the issues at stake, both in Africa but also across the world. It will allow for an initial assessment of parliaments in Africa have done to combat this huge problem, and there are many good practices in Africa to share. Delegations that will take part will be asked to share insights into how their parliaments have used the study to tackle sexism, harassment, and violence against women inside their premises and in the world of politics more generally. We hope that as many African parliaments as possible will accept the IPU's call to amplify the findings of the study and join others that have already taken initiatives at the national levels. And I would like to acknowledge the Parliament of Benin, the Parliament of the Central African Republic, the Parliament of Gabon, Morocco, Niger, Senegal, Sierra Leone, South Africa, as well as the Arab Parliament, who have all organized events to launch the study and launch the debate, break the taboo, launch the debate on sexism, harassment, and violence against women in Parliament. So please join us in Lomé very soon to continue this very important conversation. Thank you, Madam President.
Merci, chère Zeyna.
Zeyna, we were very pleased to hear about this regional meeting that will take place, and it'll be a great way to mark the International Day of the Elimination of Discrimination, or rather violence against women, and 16 days of activism. I hope that our African parliamentarians, both men and women, will participate, and thank you also for giving us a report on gender-sensitive parliaments during this assembly. Dear colleagues, later on this afternoon we will be able to continue the discussion on gender-sensitive parliaments and violence against women in parliaments during our debate. For now, we are going to look at item 4 on our agenda to identify the contribution of the forum to the work of the 145th Assembly from a gender perspective. This is a key role of the forum, so let's make sure that each contribution counts. The draft resolution and its discussion, the discussion thereof, is now on our agenda, and it is called Parliamentary Impetus to Local and Regional Development of Countries with High Levels of International Migration and to Stopping All Forms, including State-Sponsored, of Human Trafficking and Human Rights Abuses. Our objective today is to discuss this draft resolution from a gender perspective, so that we can come up with amendments to make the draft resolution more focused on gender sensitivity and to be more inclusive in terms of the interests of women. This will give rise to concrete recommendations that take into account gender equality and will be submitted by the forum to the committee. A brief presentation of the draft resolution will be made, and then the forum will debate it here in the plenary session. Normally, the debate will go on until 4:15, and I hope we will keep to time. Dear colleagues, the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians has nominated a president and a rapporteur for this debate. Madame Al-Nassif from Egypt has been nominated as president, and Madame Dejwala from Eswatini has been designated as rapporteur. I would like to ask you if you approve of these nominations. Thank you. And thank you very much to the President and the Rapporteur for carrying out their roles. Now, before we start the discussion, I'm very pleased to have with us the co-rapporteurs of the draft resolution, who accepted our invitation to present the general scope of the resolution. We have here with us Mr. Fadlizon from Indonesia. Is he here? He is not here, but Mr. Peter Beard from Germany is here, and he is going to present to the Assembly the draft resolution. Mr. Peter. Okay, very good. Thank you for being here with us today. You have the floor, sir.
Madam Chair, thanks for the honor to speak in front of this distinguished forum of women parliamentarians. I try to be brief, and I start with giving you a brief historic overview in very broad terms to get a better understanding what this draft resolution is all about. So at our IPU session, at our IPU meeting in November 21 in Madrid, my dear colleague Joe Wadefull initiated this draft resolution and it was agreed that in Kigali, so on our 145th assembly that we're having today and during this week, we will try to pass that resolution. In between, in Nusa Dua on Bali, during that meeting, the co-rapporteurs, my dear colleagues from Uruguay and from Indonesia, the latter being here, I hope today, they figured out already some of the things we discussed and agreed on a text as it is presented to you, to the IPU, to the forum today. So the title of this resolution is rather lengthy, but I will read it out for you because it goes to the gist of what this is all about. The topic is parliamentary impetus to local and regional development of countries with high levels of international migration and to stopping all forms, including state-sponsored, of human trafficking and human rights abuses. So that is what this is about. And I jump now to the general topic of that. So we had prior to the United Nations adoption of the Global Compact on Migration, as well as to the Global Compact of Refugees, which has been adopted in December 2018. Prior to that adoption of these two compacts, there had been a broad debate on many things, which went to the substance of migration and refugees. So this current draft resolution that has been presented to you should not merely repeat what has been agreed during the United Nations, but is seen as an addendum, as an addition to both global pacts on migration and on refugees of the United Nations. So rather than opening up the box of trying to redefine migration and refugees, my suggestion would be to focus on the abuse of refugees and of migration for political purposes, and also with a clear focus of or including state abuse by state actors of migration and refugees. That again is the current draft resolution as it had been presented to you, and we will have a discussion. You will have a discussion at this very forum today, and over the next couple of days, over the remainder of the week, we will have a discussion about all the amendments that have been contributed timely before the deadline of a number of delegations from various countries, member countries of the IPU. And so that is the goal, to by the end of this week to have that resolution adopted. And I'm thankful that I could make that brief presentation. And I will remain here for some minutes, step down of the stage because you have your regulations here. But I'm in the room and I'm happy to try to clarify if there are questions. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Peter.
Very much, Mr. Peter, for these this very helpful information, and thank you for giving up your time to attend the discussion that is about to follow. I am now going to give the floor to Madam Al-Nassif to preside over the discussions, please.
Thank you, everyone. Dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure to heed the session regarding discussing the draft resolution. Ms. Bougela is nominated a rapporteur based on the proposal of the forum. And we look forward for our discussions today that will be very fruitful, hopefully. And before giving you some introductory remarks, allow me to remind all the colleagues whom haven't asked for to do it now. And allow me first to mention that some of our documents are available regarding this meeting. I ask all who need documents to take them, to have a copy, because it encompasses everything related to the issues that are going to be discussed from tomorrow forward. We are going to take into consideration or to discuss the item entitled Parliamentary Impetus to Local and Regional Development of Countries with High Levels of International Migration and to Stopping All Forms, including state-sponsored, of human trafficking and human rights abused. And this is an item discussed by the Standing Committee on Democracy and Human Rights. We will discuss today everything related to gender, and as well upholding a rights-based, gender-responsive approach to migration. We are going to discuss as well and address the root causes to this big issue. And as well, we are going to discuss how to ensure a survivor-centered anti-trafficking legislation and its enforcement. All these aspects are going to be discussed. And we are going to discuss as well the amendments already submitted and are based on our different interests. And then the Standing Committee will review all these amendments and discuss them. Hence, I ask everyone to take into consideration the mentioned points? What are the opportunities that can impede women from migration? And how can we protect women from trafficking? What are the good current practices so that bilateral agreements related to migration don't discriminate women? And how can the migration system take into account the gender threats affecting the life of women, such as early marriage, gender mutilation, female mutilation, and trafficking? And what are the legal and organizational measures that should be taken in order to fight harassment and sexism, including online? What are the practices that should be taken in order to guarantee that women, especially those that are migrating, are survivors and can seek protection without being victims once more? Allow me now to open the floor for discussions, and I will give the floor for every person asking for it for 2 minutes, because that is unfortunately the time that we have. And I would like as well to ask you to participate actively in this discussion. Please do mention your name so we can mention that in the minutes of our meeting. Thailand, the floor is yours.
Distinguished parliamentarians, there are numbers of Thai women migrants who were deceived by employment agents. Good salary, good opportunity to work abroad make these women who are seeking for jobs easily fall for the traps. Many jobs are usually offered online through social media platforms. Such work as working as a masseur, babysitter, housekeeper, or elder caretaker. Therefore, these migrant workers are especially vulnerable to human trafficking and gender-based violence. However, we have to admit that many of these women, migrants, enter the country of destination illegally. With the status of being an illegal, therefore, it is a major reason that many cases would not be reported to the police. Moreover, these women have to do their job unwillingly and simultaneously find the way to return home country. In the view of law enforcement agents in Thailand, one of the barriers is to arrest the offenders. That cannot be done because the offense is committed out of our jurisdiction. Thai police could not arrest or prosecute the offenders in the destination country. The migration and trafficking in persons is a cross-functional issue which requires strong cooperation across country. Any country can be a country of origins, country of transit, and country of destination. Sharing information among those countries is a must practice to eliminate the problems. In addition, network of women migrants should be established in the country of destination in the first place, so the victim can ask for peer support who face the same experiences, both mental and physical. From gender perspective, Thailand sees that parliaments should raise our efforts toward human rights-based and gender-responsive implementation of GCM. Reliable and accurate sex and age disaggregated data on human trafficking, as well as gender-responsive identification and referral of victim of trafficking at all stages.
Shukran, thank you.
Thank you for this statement. Dear colleagues, I ask you to be calm so we can hear well all the interventions and have then a fruitful discussion. 2 minutes, please. Now the floor is for Bangladesh. I give the floor to Bangladesh. 2 minutes.
From here. Good morning, everybody. Mr. Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am from Bangladesh, attending as Women Parliamentarian to Program 145 IPU Assembly and also attending the event of Forum of Women Parliamentarians. My colleague Shahadara Mannan is also attending this program. Education in my country, in Bangladesh, enrollment of women all sphere and education like general education, IT education, and vocational education has been in enhancement largely the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Empowerment women in Bangladesh has been systematically changed from grassroots to top level, such as Leader of Parliament, Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Speaker of Parliament, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chowdhury, opposition leader also women's, and leader our purses. Government has taken various initiative for the development of women under social safety net program. Now Bangladesh is playing as role model for women empowerment. Thank you, dear colleague and dear distinguished colleague. Thank you, everybody. Jai Bangla, Jai Bangabandhu.
Thank you, shukran.
Thank you. I give the floor now to Iran.
دقيقتين. بسم الله. سلام، ادب و احترام و خسته نباشید خدمت همکاران گرامی.
Participants staying abstained when it comes to women is neglected. It has caused the fact that the protection of women has become very intricate. That's why we try to create some changes in policies in order to enhance their situation, and at the same time to make some changes in order to make the work better for them. So creating a potential and a framework, we should remove the fact that other person other than women work them. So we should create hope and a better life for women. At the same time, we should develop the family value and notion after coming back to their land. So in order to make these changes, we have to make some immigration issues and concentrate on them to solve them respectively and try to implement these policies, which is one of the duties of our government. So the gap between politics and action should be filled, and the issue of immigration from the source and destination, planning from the source and destination, at the same time reducing the problems and creating motivations is very essential. Currently there are no immigration policies in place, so sexuality sort of issues are neglected currently. The issue of children and women are basically neglected, so we should work on this matter. So there are many evaluations which should be put in place.
Distinguished colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would like to commend the population of Rwanda and commend the organizers for hospitality and for warm reception. Regard refugees and migrants, we should implement the principles and the UN Charter and all the international conventions, including the Geneva Convention. The position of our country is in line with Article 13 of the preamble of the resolution. We have analyzed the draft resolution, and we understood that above all, women migrants need legal support, and my colleagues participate in the Commission on legal reforms, and we have done a huge job in this regard, and we have prepared the draft law which will regulate immigration policy. And with the adoption of this law, all women will count on rendering them a medical service, educational service, and also access to food and communal services. And our colleagues, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that our delegation says that it is unacceptable, Article 5 of the preamble of the resolution. It is unacceptable that some countries demonize our country, that claiming that our country abuses human rights and the norms of international human law. Please take into account our amendments. Спасибо большое.
جنوب أفريقيا. في حد
South Africa.
Thank you also for this opportunity. We are of the opinion that for many women and girls, migration is a way to fulfill their potential, support themselves and their families, and escape deeply entrenched gender inequalities, including sexual and gender-based violence, as well as a lack of access to resources. However, being both a migrant and a female also exposes them to the risk of being subjected to violence, discrimination, and other human rights violations, which may occur throughout the migration cycle. Gender-responsive migration policies provide an opportunity to support migrant women and girls and empower them to thrive in their host communities. And in this regard, South Africa would like to add the following to the resolution, and that is in the preambular paragraph, that it is included that we express a deep concern at the reports of grave abuses and violence committed against migrant women and girls, including gender-based violence, sexual violence, domestic and family violence, discrimination, abusive labor practices, exploitative conditions of work, and all forms of forced labor and trafficking in persons. And then, Chairperson, if I may, I would also like to add the following from South Africa, to add the following new operative paragraph, and that is that it urges governments to develop, enforce, and strengthen effective gender-sensitive measures to combat and eliminate all forms of trafficking in women and girls, including sexual and economic exploitation, as part of a holistic anti-trafficking strategy that integrates a human rights perspective. And we are saying this because in the majority of countries, including South Africa, the primary driving force is poverty, with associated poor education standards and lack of employment opportunities that propel vulnerable people into the hands of traffickers. South Africa is also a transit and source country for the international market in trafficking of humans.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you على كلمة حضرتك. والآن
Now we close the list of intervention, and I ask Zimbabwe to take the floor. Zimbabwe, the floor is yours.
Trafficking in persons, particularly women and children, has become a global problem. The majority of women are lured by promises of attractive, well-paying jobs offered by agents of criminal networks without realizing the full nature of their future employment or the conditions in which they will work. In fact, most job opportunities for women migrants are in unregulated sectors such as farming, domestic and care work, as well as the sex industry. Women have less access to information on migration or job opportunities. Zimbabwe has domesticated some of the provisions of the International Protocol on Trafficking to include the criminalization of offenders, as well enacting survivor-centered provisions for victims of trafficking. Article 6, paragraph 1 of the protocol calls on member states that in appropriate cases and to the extent possible under its domestic law, each state part shall protect the privacy and identity of victims of trafficking in persons, including inter alia, by making legal proceedings relating to such trafficking confidential. Zimbabwe has experienced cases of human trafficking of its nationals. Trafficked women from Zimbabwe have been lured by high-paying domestic work in other countries. In recent years, the Zimbabwe government learned that about 200 of its female citizens had been trafficked after falling prey to human trafficking schemes. Efforts were made by the government to assist these women, but only 128 women were rescued and repatriated back home. The program was conducted in collaboration with the International Organization of Migration, which assisted with funding for medical and psychosocial support to the identified victims. In conclusion, I would like to say that women should be encouraged to seek adequate information before they embark on such perilous journeys. Through our representative function as legislators, we also have a responsibility to share information with our constituents about these human trafficking schemes so that young girls and women do not fall victim. I thank you.
Thank you. شكرا لكلمة حضرتك. والآن
Thank you. I give the floor now to Serbia, please. 2 minutes, please, so we can give the others an opportunity.
Let me tell you a few things about the situation in Serbia. Our parliament has 40% quota of women, and in our government we have a prime minister who is a lady, and about 40%, almost 40% of ministers are ladies. We are one of the few parliaments that adopted gender budgeting. So it is one of the very, very important things for enhancing and invigorating women as politicians and women as a gender. On the local level, on the level of municipalities, we are not that good, so we have only a few women mayor at the level of municipalities. But let me say one thing about migration. Serbia is a country of transit. It's not a country of a final destination. We now see that Ukrainian refugees are welcomed all over Europe with open hands, and it is okay, and we recognize that, and we are trying to do the same. But the thing is that there is racism emerging, because in Europe, other refugees with a darker tan from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Africa are not welcomed in that way. So it's the idea of a fruitful thinking for us women parliamentarians, to stop this kind of, I would say, racistic behavior. Serbia is...
Thank you so much. Thank you. أرجو الهدوء من القاعة.
Please stay calm in the room. And now I give the floor to Zambia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, thank you so much for allowing Zambia just to add voice to this very important topic. Migration is a phenomenon which often negatively impacts both countries of origin and destination. It is fueled by many factors such as conflicts, economic crisis, natural disaster, fear of persecution, and search for better jobs, among others. Owing to their vulnerability, migrants often fall prey to human trafficking and human rights abuses. Madam Chair, I would like to bring to your attention that it's quite disturbing to see that most of these people who are trafficked for sex, normally they are deprived of proper health, they're unable to attain, they're unable to receive proper health care because of them being most of the time being illegal immigrants, and also them being like treated like slaves. I'll take you to the scenario of what has happened recently in our country. We had some girls were abducted, and these were about 13 girls. And for these girls, after they left, after they were rescued, it wasn't easy for them, and they needed to be given proper counseling, and which most of these immigrants who are trafficked also they lack this proper mental support, health support from countries. In conclusion, Madam Chair, not to take much of your time, I just want to bring to attention that in Zambia, parliamentarians have a central role to play through their constitutional functions to ensure that migration is contained.
Thank you.
And citizens'
Thank
rights
you
are
so much.
safeguarded.
Thank you. شكرا على كلمة حضرتك. والآن أدعو
for your kind input, and now I give the floor to Australia, and please calm down in the room, please. So I give the floor to Australia, just 2 minutes. Ma'am.
The committee on this motion, and on behalf of Australia, I would like to offer consideration for this meeting to consider one particular form of trafficking, and that is orphanage trafficking, which is an issue that Australia has taken the lead on globally. It is a form of trafficking and slavery that we can address. We can address readily post-COVID to prevent millions of children being trafficked into orphanages so that people can profit from this trade. So what I would recommend and suggest is if we can include in section 14 reference specifically to orphanage trafficking, to make sure that those of us from donor supply countries can change the behaviours of our donors to stop supporting false orphanages and the trafficking of children from donor supply countries. So I would like to recommend that that issue be specifically addressed in this statement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. والآن أدعو.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Syria. Thank you. Nisa Saleh from the Arab Republic of Syria. Human trafficking is not just an organized crime, a transboundary crime, but also it is related to human rights, and it has development dimensions and also impact on migration. How can we fight human trafficking through a political will and through addressing the issues of poverty and weaknesses that would lead to victims of war. Also, fighting human trafficking is the responsibility of the origin and destination countries and transit countries. These countries have to work in order to put an end to the exploitation of victims and to put an end to human trafficking. Of course, there are assisting factors such as the gender discrimination, which makes women and girls more subject to human trafficking, and also having corrupt government employees and civil servants, and also having organized crime networks that are involved in human trafficking. This is why we have to shed the light on the work of the Arab Republic of Syria in this direction. In fact, we've had a decree number 3 for the year 2010, and it included the Anti-Human Trafficking Law, which articles have determined procedures that would guarantee the rights of victims, as well as efforts deployed by Syria in order to join the international conventions. Syria has also established an entity including representatives of 10 ministries and also representatives of organizations, and also it is contributing to having awareness sessions against human trafficking. Of course, there are obstacles, which is, for example, the non-collaboration of the neighboring countries in the exchange of information, and also the lack of reporting on human trafficking. There was a national action plan to put an end to human trafficking at the national level, at the regional level, and at the international level, with many aspects. And we have to assert that the international community should intensify its efforts to face such a dangerous problem, which is human trafficking. Many thanks. Thank you for your intervention. And now, for just 2 minutes, I give the floor to the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you for all the ideas that have been raised, as well as all the suggestions that have been given. And as the Parliament of the UAE, we would like to assert the importance of issuing legislations that would guarantee the efficient political participation of women and their protection. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share with you some of the achievements of the UAE in terms of the political empowerment of women. For example, the decision of increasing the representation of women to 50% in the Parliament. Also, the share of working women in leading positions and in teaching, in health positions, it went from 46% to 72% based on the different indicators for the year 2020. There are more than 25,000 business women who are leading investments with a value going beyond 60 million dirham inside of the state. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for having abided by the time allocated to you. And now we give the floor to Turkey. Turkey. So, the state of Turkey.
Dear colleagues, distinguished participants, human trafficking remains the major challenges to the security and the development of all the countries. We can only tackle this issue through international cooperation. With this mindset, we fully support all international cooperation mechanisms combating human trafficking and take all necessary measures for effective implementation of United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crimes and its protocols. We continue to display a decisive and progressive approach against human trafficking. We have introduced numerous administrative and legal measures regarding the main pillars of combating human trafficking: prevention, protection, prosecution, and cooperation. As the members of parliament, we are on the legislation side, and in this perspective, in December 2019, human trafficking was included in the Catalog Crimes of Criminal Procedure Code of Turkey. This has considerably strengthened the judicial processes in order to coordinate the efforts on fight against human trafficking. We have established a coordination body among relevant public institutions. We believe in the role of information and experience sharing among countries to further improve and consolidate national efforts in encountering human trafficking. In line with rights-based, gender-responsive approach to the migration, Turkey takes necessary steps to prioritize the specific needs, challenges and vulnerable situation of women and girls at all stages of migration due to their increased vulnerabilities to human rights violations and gender-based discrimination. I want to underline the importance of laws, policies and programs introduced by Turkey, recognizing and addressing the different experiences, needs, and vulnerabilities faced, especially by women and girl migrants at all stages of migration, while upholding their human rights, promoting their empowerment, and advancing gender equality. I believe that parliaments should play a vital role.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Stay calm, please, in the room. And we give the floor now to the state of Pakistan.
It is a fact that Pakistan is a developing nation with a substantial percentage of its population surviving below the poverty line. When faced with hunger and want, many vulnerable people fall victim to those with nefarious ideas. This reality has become even more stark post the recent flooding, which threatens to push an additional 9 million Pakistanis below the poverty line. However enticing as it may seem, however greener the pastures may look, trafficking remains a heinous crime. But it is a reality that the poor, the poverty-stricken, look towards this as an answer to their hunger, to their want, to their needs. Pakistan has made strides in ensuring that we can adhere to our constitution, Article 11(2) of which prohibits all forms of forced labor and trafficking. We have enacted the Prevention and Control of Human Trafficking Ordinance, the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act in 2018, and the Transactional Organized Crime Act in 2000. We remain committed to stopping trafficking, whether of women or of children. However, the reality is that as hard as we try, there are loopholes, there are porous borders that remain a challenge. There is poverty which remains a challenge. And I feel unless we all come together, the world, and commit ourselves to stopping trafficking of women and of children and all vulnerable segments of society, alone any nation cannot stop this evil. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you so much.
I give the floor now to the state of England. So the state of England.
Madam Chair, and I would like to warmly support this debate and this resolution. The only recommendation I would make is that to section 14(1 we add the words "and modern day slavery," because indeed it is slavery that we are talking about in many cases here. I would also like to say, in response to what I think is the elephant in the room, that since the 24th of February, nearly 4 million people have had to flee from Ukraine, many of them women and children. And we in the United Kingdom have welcomed over 100,000 of them into our homes. And what I would say, therefore, to my colleague from the Russian parliament is that this would not be happening if cruise missiles and indiscriminate attacks were not happening on civilian targets within Ukraine. And I would urge her to take back a message of peace from this assembly, from the women parliamentarians of the world, that we would like to see an end to this aggressive and unwarranted attack on a neighboring sovereign state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. الآن
I give the floor now to Jordan. Thank you, Madam President. I will be positive while speaking on behalf of Jordan, especially that there was a law promulgated, Anti-Human Trafficking Law, in 2009, and there was a national committee that was formed to prevent trafficking, and there was also a national strategy against human trafficking, and it included 4 aspects: prevention, protection, prosecution, and building partnerships in order to put an end to human trafficking. And also, the coalition of women parliamentarians from the Arab world has been established to fight human trafficking. And in fact, it was entrusted with taking a lot of actions to protect women against human trafficking. And also, we've had the Jordanian Parliamentarians Forum that was held in Jordan. And during that forum, a lot of discriminatory laws have been discussed and a lot of amendments have been introduced to support women. And currently, right on the table of the parliament, we have the labor law in Jordan that strives for paving the way for a secure working environment for women and for protecting women against sexual harassment. And all of this does not happen but through a direct support from a wise leadership in Jordan, a wise leadership by His Excellency King Abdullah II to support the Jordanian women against all kinds of discrimination and violence. Thank you so much. I give the floor now to Canada.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that we're talking about stakes that are very important on the trafficking of people. We have a parliamentary group which is against modern slavery and human trafficking. They work on these issues to organize conferences and to raise the debate and awareness on what is at stake here. This year is an important moment to reflect on this. We have a day that is dedicated to human trafficking, to fighting human trafficking. Canada is aware that in this year, in 2022, we still see a lot of human trafficking and migration. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Greece.
Madam Chair, a special principal reason of women immigration is climate change. We can't forget it. As Antonio Guterres said, half of humanity is in the danger zone from floods, droughts, extreme storms and wildfires. I strongly support these words. We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It's in our hands. Climate change became visible this year. Extreme heat waves and droughts in Europe, humanitarian crisis, in the Horn of Africa, disease in Haiti, climate carnage in Pakistan, some examples. But according to recent research, women appear to be more affected by climate change negative effects, as they are particularly vulnerable to climate-related calamities. It is estimated that the probability of death due to climate-related catastrophes is about 14 times higher in women than in men. Indeed, for many women, climate change is not just the occurrence of higher summer temperatures, but often results less food, more limited access to drinking water, sanitation, or safe living conditions than men, but critically, it often leads to new threats toward their rights. Despite their vulnerability to climate catastrophes, women play a vital role in actions associated with the recovery from such events. So we understand that a reason for women immigration is the climate change and effects to women people.
Thank you. والآن
Thank you. I now give the floor to Malawi.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Madam Chairperson, trafficking in persons as a modern slavery and human rights violation has not been spared Malawi. In trying to address this issue, the Malawi government launched a national plan of action in 2017, and they created some sort of fund for survivors of the trafficking. Malawi has stringent laws around the trafficking and the exploitation, including Trafficking in Persons Act of 2015, which criminalizes sex and labor trafficking, and prescribe punishments up to 14 years imprisonment for offenses involving adults, victims, and up to 21 years imprisonment for crimes involving children victims. Enacting the Trafficking in Persons Act of 2015, Malawi demonstrated its commitment to fulfill the country's obligation undertaking as a party to the United Nations Convention against transitional organized crime, and is implementing protocols, in particular protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking persons, especially women and children. Madam Chairperson, even the Malawi Constitution clearly stipulates that no person is to be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and slave trade are prohibited, and no persons is to be subjected to forced labor or child labor that amount to servitude. Other legislation like the Marriage, Divorce, and Family Relations Act and the Electronic Transaction and Cybersecurity Act of 2016 contain the provisions that indirectly contribute towards efforts to end Trafficking in Persons Act. I thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you so much. والآن الأدعو.
I give the floor now to Ukraine.
Shukran, Madam Chair. Thank you, dear colleagues. I will try to be very succinct. Ukraine greets this draft resolution and has suggested several amendments to it. While human trafficking and sex crimes have significantly increased in number, especially against Ukrainian women who have found themselves in a vulnerable position as refugees, today, 14 million of Ukrainian women had to abandon their homes. 7 million persons had to flee Ukraine, had to go abroad to seek safety. Why? Because of the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. And why? Because mothers like me do not want their children to be among those 386 boys and girls killed by Russian missiles, bullets, and artillery. Nor do we want them to be among the 700 children wounded by Russian missiles, bullets, and artillery. The attacks in the last 24 hours over Ukraine are making Ukraine further unlivable. 83 missiles have been launched in the last 24 hours on 12 regions of Ukraine. Also, these attacks were carried out by drones of Iranian origin. These attacks have damaged critical infrastructure, heat and power stations, and caused 19 people to die. In total, over the last 230 days of escalated Russian aggression, Russia has destroyed 40,000 educational facilities, that is schools and kindergartens, sometimes with children in them. 150 hospitals have been damaged, including maternity wards. The strategy against civilians and civilian infrastructure is a war crime in itself, and all of those guilty of this war crime and those who endorse this war crimes with their political decisions will bear full responsibility and will pay for their actions. This criminal, inhumane behavior will have to stop, and Ukraine will be rebuilt and will be made livable again. But for it to be made livable again and for people to come back, and people, trust me, those millions of Ukrainian women and children abroad, they do want to come back. They don't want anything more than to come back. But the countries hosting them need to create the possibilities for them to have the links with their countries. And this is where I need 30 seconds of your time to read the proposed amendment by Ukraine to Article 8 of this resolution. So we would like it to read as urges the IPU member parliaments to promote adoption and implementation of specific programs protecting the rights of refugees, paying specific attention to the needs of women and children, facilitating employment, ensuring education in their native language, and preserving the cultural ties of refugee children to their homeland. And I will give this draft ready to the Secretariat.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor now to Qatar for 2 minutes.
سأتحدث عن الآليات والتدابير.
Thank you, Ms. President. I will be talking about the mechanisms used in Qatar in order to fight human trafficking. Qatar gives great importance to fight human trafficking and promoted all the efforts in order to establish the legal ground and to support all the national, regional and international efforts to fight trafficking, human trafficking. In 2011, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, head of Qatar, promulgated the law related to fighting human trafficking, encompassing a definition for human trafficking, a definition for the victims, and as well mentioning all the international conventions that we are abiding by and the punishments. A committee as well was created, affiliated to the Ministry of Interior, so it can work on implementing the law. And in 2017, a national committee to fight human trafficking was established according to the Decree 2017, and that to establish as well a plan in order to fight human trafficking and follow on the annual reports related to fighting human trafficking in the different cities of Qatar. And as well, this year, Mr. Mohammed Al-Ubaidi, responsible of the Work and Labor Authority in Qatar, to work hand in hand with the US ministries in order to fight as well this crime. And concerning the reports, I suggest to mention a timeline, especially everything related to the national strategies. Thank you. I give the floor now to Kenya. Kenya, the floor is yours.
And I'd like to appreciate our neighbor Rwanda for this wonderful hosting of this 145th IPU assembly. Kenya is one of the countries that hosts the highest number of refugees. We also have a large number of migrants and victims of human trafficking passing through our country. And I would like to commend the IPU and support the resolution that has been brought on this question. And I'd like to support and request that the language expressly prohibit racism that is one of the manifestations in the issue of migrants. We have noticed that migrants from African countries are treated as the scum of human race. We have also noticed that young girls who go into the Middle East are mistreated, sexually abused, subjected to physical abuse, including cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And we believe that only international cooperation can actually resolve this issue. It doesn't matter how good the law is in Kenya, if the receiving country does not have a law that protects the labor rights of those that come in, then our law is in futility. So we support and recommend that all members of IPU go back home and work on correct labor laws that protect all persons in their jurisdictions, including migrants, including refugees, including all foreigners who seek employment in their country. That is the only way we can deal with this, Madam Chair. I support.
Thank you so much. والآن الكلمة.
I give the floor now to UN Women.
Woman.
Thank you very much, dear Chair. Thank you very much, participants, for allowing me from UN Women to say a few words. These are some recommendations based on the Secretary General's most recent report on trafficking in women and girls, which was published in August. Here I'd just like to make 5 points. One, it is important to see trafficking in women and girls as recognizing it as a form of gender-based violence. And states should ensure that responses to crisis address the risk of trafficking for women and girls. I'm going to focus on trafficking in my remarks. When it comes to prevention and response, efforts by states to eliminate trafficking in women and girls in the long term should include measures which include addressing the demand that fosters sexual and other forms of exploitation by investing in education and community-based programs that challenge harmful social norms, male domination, and sexual entitlement. The measures should address the economic drivers and vulnerability factors that may push women and girls to seek risky opportunities. And the measures should strengthen the capacities of response teams in settings for internally displaced persons, refugees, and large migrants in order to better identify the potential victims. In the responses, it is essential to ensure that survivors of trafficking are given long-term, comprehensive reintegration support, including economic empowerment and psychological support, and asylum when they want it. It is essential to facilitate safe and orderly migration during crises, especially through the provision of temporary humanitarian and family reunification visas. Such efforts should not be limited only to nationals of the affected countries, but to all of those who are living in a crisis situation. On the issue of technology, it is important to look at the increasing role of technology, as others have mentioned, in facilitating trafficking. And finally, on the issue of data collection efforts should address the disaggregation. So ensure that we're looking at age, gender, disability, and other forms of disaggregation.
Thank you so much. والآن الكلمة
Floor now to BMNCH.
My name is Ulrika Carlson, and I'm representing the Partnership for Maternal Newborn Child Health. I thank you for the opportunity to make an intervention on this important draft resolution. Migration, displacement, and human trafficking all very much impact women, adolescents, and children. In fact, even the most. Displaced women and children, and in particular girls, are particularly vulnerable to gender-based violence, poor reproductive health, unwanted pregnancies, and seriously negative outcomes on maternal health. In fact, the countries with the worst maternal mortality rates are all affected by conflicts. The urgent need and the target action is needed to ensure that victims of violence, including women and girls, have access to essential health services, including mental health support. In this respect, it is important to note that half of the 1.4 billion people living in countries affected by crisis in fragile conditions are below 20 years of age. Adolescents require critical health services and sexual reproductive health services, including right-based interventions to prevent unwanted pregnancies and unsafe abortions. We therefore would like this resolution to be strengthened to include specific language on women, adolescents, and children, with a focus on the urgent need for comprehensive sexual reproductive health and rights, adolescents' health and well-being, and mental health services. Members of Parliament have a critical role to play in ensuring that the health and well-being of women, children, and adolescents is prioritized in humanitarian emergencies. And we, the partnership, will be happy to continue the collaboration with the former women MPs and national parliamentarians. So thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair.
so much. Thank you. والآن دولة إيران
Iran is asking to respond to the command of Ukraine. 1 minute. So Iran is asking for the right to respond. The floor is yours. 1 minute.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Islamic Republic of Iran, exercising its right of reply regarding the baseless allegations in the use of Iranian drones in Ukraine, and would like to refer to the following points. Since the beginning of the conflict, we have always announced our principled and clear policy on active impartiality and opposition to war, underlying the necessity of a political resolution to disputes between both sides and away from violence. Accordingly, over the past months, the Foreign Minister of Islamic Republic of Iran, in numerous meetings and contacts with his Russian and Ukrainian counterparts, has always reiterated the need for the resolution of disagreements in a peaceful manner and through talks, and has announced Iran's readiness to help this process. The principal position of Islamic Republic of Iran is based on arming and arming of any parties and aim to end of the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to close the
We reached the end of our discussion. Dear colleagues, allow me to thank you all for all your very important contributions. And now myself and Ms. Boujella will be working on summarizing the main points of our discussions. And Ms. Boujella will be presenting a report related to our discussion during the afternoon period of our forum, the Forum of Women Parliamentarians. And thank you for this very fruitful discussion. Thank you.